There's this shallow lake in East Idaho we like to fish. It's one of those places that doesn't look like much on a map. Just a little patch of blue surrounded by farmland, barely a ripple of water tucked among the fields. But if you stand on the shore, it's a whole different world. There are lush trees crowding the edges, thick patches of willows and cottonwoods that lean out over the water. The lake's surface is glassy on still days, only broken by the faint shimmer of fish rising or the occasional ripple of a breeze. It's quiet out there, real quiet. You can hear birds moving in the brush, insects buzzing, the soft slap of water on the sides of the boat. When the sun's low, the light hits the surface just right, and everything glows golden. It's a peaceful place. Usually, the first time we saw the moose, it was early spring. My buddy and I had just pulled into the little gravel parking lot by the lake. We were loading up gear, rods, tackle boxes, waders, the usual. I remember I was bent over, fiddling with the straps on the cooler, when he gave a sharp whistle. I looked up and saw them. 2 moose, standing right at the tree lean behind the lot. They were huge. I'd seen moose before, on trips to Alaska, a couple times up in Montana, but it never really sinks in until you see them up close. They're not just big deer, they're towers. Long legs, thick necks, massive heads. These 2 were just standing there, calm as could be, watching us. One flicked an ear, the other shifted its weight, but they didn't seem in any rush. We stayed in the car, quiet, watching them from behind the windshield. We waited maybe 15 minutes before they slowly wandered off into the trees, disappearing like shadows slipping between the trunks. We shrugged it off. Cool sighting, sure, but no big deal, right? The next couple weekends, we kept coming back to that lake. The fishing was good, the water shallow but rich with trout. We'd paddle out in a little John boat, casting lines, letting the hours drift by. But then the moose started showing up again. The second time, we were already out on the water, maybe 100 yards from shore, when I saw one on the tree lean. At first, I was excited. Hey, wildlife, always cool to see. I lifted a hand, pointing it out to my buddy. But then I noticed something. It wasn't on the shore. It was in the water. Its dark shape stood out against the pale green of the trees, long legs submerged, water rippling around its knees. We were in maybe 5 feet of water, shallow enough that you could stand up if you wanted. And this moose, this giant moose, was standing there maybe 100 yards away, looking right at us. It stared for a long time. A long time. It was one of those moments where your brain shifts gears, where you go from, oh cool, a moose, to, oh shit, a moose, because you start doing the math in your head. You realize that if that animal decided to walk toward you, it could. Nothing was stopping it. No deep channels, no tricky barriers. Just shallow, easy water. And when you're sitting in a tiny boat, you feel small. I could feel my heart thumping as I watched it. We stayed quiet, hands still on the rods, barely breathing. Eventually, the moose turned away, back toward the trees, and vanished into the brush. We exhaled, laughing nervously, making little jokes to shake off the tension. But deep down, I felt it. That pulse of real, physical awareness. The kind that says, you're not at the top of the food chain here. The next weekend, we went back again. And this time, things ratcheted up another level. We were already on edge, half expecting to see the moose again. Sure enough, not long after we launched, we spotted movement near the tree lean. 3 moose, 2 cows, and a bull. And they were closer this time, standing right at the edge of the shallows, half in, half out of the water. The bull was massive. His antlers spread wide, casting jagged shadows across the lake. Even from a distance, you could feel the weight of him, the sheer presence. We drifted silently, not daring to get closer. I could feel the air shift, that subtle tension, like the world was holding its breath. The moose were grazing, pulling at low-hanging branches, sloshing through the water. They weren't paying us much attention, but every now and then, one would lift its head, eyes sweeping across the lake, landing on us. When those eyes hit you, it's like being pinned by something old, something heavy. It's not a predator's stare. It's something more indifferent, like you're too small to matter, but if you do annoy them, you'll get crushed without a second thought. We sat frozen, hands resting on our knees, waiting. Minutes crawled by. The moose moved slowly, feeding, shifting. Water lapped against the hull, gentle but steady. My palms were damp against the aluminum. I thought about how thin the boat felt, how close the shore was, how easily a frightened or angry animal could cover the distance. I kept thinking, they're used to anglers. They're used to seeing boats. Just stay calm. But the size of them, it gets inside you. They don't have to do anything threatening. They just are. They're walking walls of muscle and bone, heavy as cars, tall as horses, built to move through thick brush, deep snow, hard water. They don't need to be fast. They don't need to be smart. They're too big to care. Eventually, after what felt like forever, the bull turned away, lumbering up the bank. The cows followed, slow and steady, disappearing into the trees. We let out shaky breaths, shared a few nervous laughs, and went back to fishing. But the edge stayed with us. It stayed with me all the way home. Even now, thinking back on it, I remember the way my chest felt tight, the way my mind kept running through scenarios. What if they charged? What if they'd spooked? What if we drifted just a little closer without realizing it? Moose aren't hunters. They're not looking for fights, but they don't need to hunt to be dangerous. When you're that big, the world moves around you. And the rest of us, we just try not to get in the way. We kept fishing that lake through the season, but we were more careful. We paid attention to the treeline. We kept an eye on the water. Sometimes we saw the moose again, sometimes we didn't. But every time we launched, I felt that little flicker of awareness, that quiet respect. Because out there, in the stillness, in the shallow water, you realize something important. Nature doesn't care how clever you are. It doesn't care how prepared you think you are, or how calm you act, or how many times you've been there before. Some things are just big. Big enough to change the rules. Big enough to remind you that you're not in charge. And when you're standing in 5 feet of water, watching a creature the size of a car stare you down, you understand, you don't have to be smart when you're too big to die. You just have to be. And if you're lucky, you get to drift quietly back to shore, heart still pounding, with another story to tell. And the memory of those heavy shapes, moving like shadows through the water, long after you've gone home. I always thought I knew how big things were. Big trees, big rocks, big animals. But I was wrong. It started when I went on a solo hiking trip deep into the backcountry of British Columbia. I had done plenty of long hikes before, but this time I wanted to go even farther, into an old valley that I had seen on some satellite maps but never read much about. There weren't any trails marked on public maps, but the satellite images showed open meadows, rocky outcrops, and lots of forest. I figured it was just an unexplored valley, nothing too different. I packed my usual gear: tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a small stove, rain gear, bear spray, and a hunting knife. I also brought a small GPS device with an emergency beacon. My plan was to stay out 3 nights, maybe 4 if the weather held up. The first 2 days were easy enough. I crossed thick pine forests, pushed through some underbrush, and set up camp near a small river. I didn't see any people or signs of people. No campsites, no fire rings, no litter. It was beautiful, really. On the 3rd day, I reached the entrance to the valley. It opened up wide, grassy slopes, patches of trees, big rocky ledges along the sides. From the ground, it looked even better than the satellite images. I felt like I had stepped back in time. I hiked along a small ridge, following some old animal trails, until I found a good overlook where I could see down into the open meadow below. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought they were boulders. Big, dark shapes moving slowly along the far end of the meadow. I crouched down, squinting. They were animals, but they were huge, way bigger than any moose or elk I'd ever seen. They were grazing in a loose herd, maybe 20 of them. I pulled out my binoculars. My hands shook when I brought them to my eyes. They were not moose, not elk, not bison. They looked like aurochs, giant cattle with curved horns, shaggy shoulders, and thick necks. But they were the size of small cars. I could see the shine on their horns, the swing of their heavy tails. They moved slowly, methodically, tearing up grass and low shrubs. I felt a cold wave pass over me. These animals were supposed to be extinct for thousands of years. I stayed low, watching them for almost an hour. I told myself it had to be some feral cattle population, maybe an isolated herd that had gone wild for generations and gotten big, maybe crossed with bison. But deep down, I knew these weren't just wild cows. They were something much, much older. I backed away quietly and made my way down the ridge, following the edge of the trees. I wanted to see if I could get closer without being seen. I knew it was stupid. I knew it was dangerous, but I had to know. As I worked my way down, I noticed something strange. Massive footprints in the soft ground, like giant round depressions, way too big for moose or elk. Some of them were as wide as a garbage can lid. And there was something else, a smell in the air, heavy, musky, and almost rotten. I came around a stand of trees and froze. Ahead of me, near a shallow pond, was another shape. This one was different. It was a mammoth. It looked just like the pictures from museums and books. Long curved tusks, a trunk, thick woolly fur hanging in mats along its sides. It was bigger than a school bus. It stood in the water, splashing its trunk, tossing wet grass over its back. Its ears flapped slowly, and I could see the rough, wrinkled skin beneath the fur. I dropped to the ground, heart pounding. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. But then I noticed something else. Movement beyond the mammoth. On the far side of the pond, something massive moved through the trees. I saw a thick gray hide, a broad snout, and a long horn curving forward. A woolly rhinoceros. I felt dizzy, almost sick. This wasn't just a hidden herd of giant cattle. This was something else entirely. Something that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the animals. I knew I couldn't stay here. If they saw me, I didn't know how they would react. These weren't animals used to people. They were ancient, untouched. But then I stepped on a branch, cracked under my boot. The mammoth's head shot up. Its ears flared, and its trunk curled high, sniffing the air. I held my breath, sinking lower to the ground. But it was too late. With a deep, rumbling bellow, the mammoth turned and started moving toward me. Not running, just walking, but each step shook the ground. I could hear the soft thud of its feet, the heavy rustle of its fur. I scrambled back, trying to stay low. My heart pounded in my ears. I wasn't sure if it had seen me or just smelled me, but I knew I couldn't stay. I turned and ran. I ran through the trees, pushing branches aside, slipping on damp ground. I could hear heavy movement behind me. Not crashing, not a full charge, but steady, relentless steps. I didn't look back. I ran until I reached the ridge, scrambling up the rocky slope. My legs burned, and my chest heaved, but I didn't stop. When I reached the top, I risked a glance back. The mammoth was still below, standing at the edge of the trees, trunk raised. It didn't follow me up the ridge. It just watched. But farther back, in the meadow, I could see the herd of aurochs gathering. And beyond them, near the pond, the rhino moved along the edge, shaking its head. I didn't waste any more time. I turned and followed the ridge back the way I came. I didn't stop until I was well away from the valley. That night, I set up camp deep in the forest, far from the meadow. I barely slept. Every sound in the dark made my skin crawl. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves. I kept imagining giant shadows moving through the trees, tusks gleaming, horns glinting in the moonlight. The next morning, I broke camp at first light. I hiked fast, barely stopping to eat or drink. My legs ached, and my feet blistered, but I didn't care. I needed to get back to familiar ground, back to where I knew there were normal animals, deer, moose, black bears. I didn't see the giant animals again, but I found more signs. Huge footprints along muddy riverbanks, bark stripped high up on trees, massive piles of dung, stinking and swarming with flies. These weren't isolated animals. There was a whole population out there, hidden, surviving. By the time I made it back to my car, I was exhausted, filthy, and shaking. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, just breathing, trying to process what I had seen. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? I didn't take any pictures. I didn't bring back any samples. I only had my memory and the deep, gut-wrenching knowledge that I had stumbled into something ancient, something forgotten. But here's the part that sticks with me the most. It wasn't just the size of the animals. It was the scale of everything. People think they understand big animals, but they don't. You don't know how massive a mammoth is until you feel the ground shake under its feet. You don't know how heavy an aurochs is until you see the muscles bunching under its hide, the horns slicing through the air. These animals weren't just big. They were giant. They belonged to a world we no longer live in, a world that still lingers in some deep, forgotten valley. And they're still out there. I don't know how they survived. Maybe the valley was always isolated. Maybe they kept to themselves because people never came close enough. Maybe they don't need much space, or maybe they move across vast stretches of land without being seen. But they're still there. Sometimes I think about going back, bringing cameras, setting up hidden traps, collecting real proof. But then I remember the way the mammoth looked at me. Not with fear, not with curiosity, but with something older, deeper. A presence that said, "You don't belong here." And I know I can't go back. That valley belongs to them, and it always will. I always took the same trail every morning. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old footpath that wound through a wooded area near where I lived, about 5 miles out and back. It had a couple of steep sections, a few switchbacks, and one narrow stretch where the trail hugged the base of a tall cliff. I liked that trail because it was quiet. I could walk without seeing anyone else, just the trees, the birds, sometimes a deer or two in the distance. It was my time to clear my head, breathe the cold morning air, and feel the ground under my boots. One morning, I got up before dawn, packed a little water and a snack, laced up my boots, and headed out. It was cool and gray, with low clouds hanging in the trees. The forest smelled damp, earthy, like wet leaves and pine needles. I hadn't gone far when I noticed something strange. There was blood on the trail. It wasn't much at first, just a few dark red spots on the packed dirt. I stopped and crouched down, touching the edge of one with my fingertip. It was fresh, still wet. I looked around, but the woods were quiet. No sounds, no movement. I figured maybe a deer had passed through and scraped itself on a branch or something. I kept walking, but as I went, the blood spots became more frequent. They weren't just little dots anymore. They were smears, splashes, dark patches in the dirt. My stomach tightened. I started to wonder if maybe I was walking into something dangerous. A wounded animal could be nearby, maybe a deer or a coyote, maybe even a bear. Wounded animals can be unpredictable, even aggressive. I slowed my steps, listening carefully. The forest was still quiet, too quiet. I reached the section of the trail that ran under the cliff. The rock face rose up sharply on my right, with loose stones and dirt at its base. The blood trail led up the slope, away from the main path. I stopped. For a moment, I thought about turning back, but curiosity tugged at me. I wanted to know what had happened, what had left that trail. I climbed up the bank, digging my boots into the loose earth. It was steep, and I had to use my hands to steady myself. As I reached a small ledge partway up, I looked up and froze. There, not 20 feet away, was a doe. She stood on shaky legs, sides heaving, head down. Beneath her, on the ground, was a tiny, wet fawn, barely moving. The doe's flanks were streaked with blood. Her ears flicked nervously, and her eyes were wide and glossy. She shifted her weight, taking a careful step forward, then backward, almost stamping her hooves as if unsure what to do. I crouched down, heart pounding. I realized I had stumbled right into the middle of her giving birth. I watched, hardly breathing. The fawn kicked weakly, legs splayed out awkwardly. The doe licked at it, nosing its wet fur, pushing at its small body. She kept glancing around, ears twitching at every sound, every shift of the wind. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Awe for sure. I had never seen anything like this before, but also discomfort, like I was intruding on something private, something I wasn't meant to see. I stayed for maybe a minute or two just watching. Then a sharp gust of wind rattled the branches above, and the doe's head shot up. Her dark eyes locked onto mine. I froze. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. Then, carefully, quietly, I backed away. I made my way down the slope, trying not to slip on the loose dirt. When I reached the trail, I took one last glance back up the bank. I could just barely see the doe standing over her fawn, head lowered again. I walked on, heart still beating fast. The rest of the hike felt strange. The forest, usually so peaceful, seemed tense, charged. Every rustle in the underbrush made me jump. Every bird call sounded sharp and sudden. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. Over the next few days, I kept wondering if the doe and the fawn were okay. It had been such a vulnerable moment. The woods were full of dangers. Coyotes, bobcats, even bears. A newborn fawn was easy prey. That weekend, I went out again, following the same trail. It was a bright, sunny morning this time, with blue skies and warm air. The forest felt alive again. Birds singing, squirrels chasing each other through the trees, insects buzzing in the tall grass. As I neared the meadow near the end of the trail, I saw movement ahead. I crouched down, heart racing. There, on the far side of the meadow, was the doe, and beside her, wobbly but standing, was the fawn. They moved slowly through the grass, the doe grazing carefully while the fawn stayed close to her side, its legs still awkward and thin. I watched from a distance, staying still, not wanting to disturb them. For a long time, I just stood there, breathing in the warm air, feeling a strange, deep sense of relief. They had made it. They were alive. I eventually turned and made my way back home, feeling lighter, calmer, more connected to the world around me. But something about that experience stayed with me. It wasn't just the blood on the trail or the raw moment of seeing birth in the wild. It was the realization of how delicate life is, how thin the line is between survival and danger. Every time I walk that trail now, I think about that doe and her fawn. I wonder how they're doing, if they made it through the season, if they're still somewhere out there in the woods. And I remember how close I came to walking into something I didn't understand, something that wasn't mine to witness. It reminds me to stay humble, to respect the wild, and to tread carefully. Because out there, in the deep, quiet woods, life and death are always just a breath apart. I've been hiking for years. I don't mean little one-hour strolls on well-paved nature trails. I mean real hiking, days-long trips through rough, remote places where you might not see another person the whole time you're out there. I like it that way, the quiet, the solitude, the feeling of being far from everything. Out there, it's just you and the land. A few months ago, I decided to take a trip deeper into an area I hadn't explored before. It was part of a national forest, but not one of the popular sections with busy campgrounds or marked trails. This was rough country. Tangled woods, rocky hills, old logging roads overgrown with weeds, and streams you had to cross by hopping stones. I planned carefully, packed everything I'd need, and set out on a Friday morning. The first day was uneventful. I parked my truck at a pull-off where the road ended and followed an old footpath into the woods. The weather was cool and overcast, perfect for hiking. The air smelled like pine and damp earth. My boots crunched over fallen leaves and twigs as I moved deeper into the forest. I covered about 10 miles that day, crossing ridges and valleys, making my way up into higher ground where the trees thinned out. I set up camp by a small stream, ate a simple dinner, and crawled into my sleeping bag as the sun set behind the hills. The first night passed quietly. On the second day, things started to feel off. I can't explain it clearly. The forest was the same trees, same wind, same smells. But I had the sense that something was watching me. It wasn't just nerves. I've done enough solo hikes to know the difference between normal backcountry unease and something that makes your skin crawl. The first sign was the silence. Normally, the forest is full of little sounds. Birds calling, squirrels rustling through the underbrush, the wind moving through the trees. But around midday, the woods fell still. No barges, no insects, no wind, just dead quiet. I stopped walking and listened. Nothing. That's when I noticed the tracks. I had stopped to drink some water and rest by a fallen log. As I stretched my legs, I noticed marks in the soft dirt nearby. Big, heavy prints. Hooves. At first, I thought they were elk. I've seen elk tracks plenty of times. They're large, oval-shaped, and deep. But these were bigger, much bigger. I crouched down, looking closer. The prints were wide, deeply sunk into the earth, and spaced far apart, as if whatever made them was massive and moving fast. I measured one roughly with my boot. It was easily twice the size of any elk print I'd ever seen. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. I followed the tracks for a bit, moving slowly, trying to stay quiet. They led through a stand of trees, down a slope, and across a narrow stream. On the other side, the ground was torn up. Clods of dirt, crushed plants, snapped branches. Something big had passed through here, and it hadn't been long ago. The dirt was still moist, the broken plants still fresh. I stood there for a while, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. Whatever it was close. I decided to keep moving. By late afternoon, I found a sheltered spot beneath a rocky overhang and set up camp. I ate, trying to calm myself, telling myself it was just an unusually large elk or maybe a moose. But deep down, I knew something didn't add up. The night came down cold and fast. I built a small fire, kept it going until late, and then crawled into my tent. That night, I heard movement. At first, it was faint, the crack of a branch, the rustle of underbrush. I held my breath, straining to hear. It was moving just outside the circle of firelight. Heavy, deliberate steps. I didn't sleep much. By dawn, the sounds had stopped, but I packed up quickly and moved out. I wanted to put distance between me and whatever was out there. The third day was hard. I was tired, on edge, and the trail was rough. The terrain grew steeper, the forest denser. The tracks appeared again, crossing the path ahead of me. I crouched down to look, feeling that same creeping fear. They were fresh. As the sun dipped lower, the woods darkened. I knew I had to find a place to stop, but every instinct told me to keep moving. The problem was, the ground grew rougher the farther I went. Steep slopes, tangled brush, rocky gullies. I finally gave in and set up camp in a narrow hollow between two ridges. That night was worse than the last. I heard it again. The heavy steps, the slow, deliberate pacing just beyond the edge of the camp. Every time I shifted in my sleeping bag or adjusted my weight, the sounds stopped. As soon as I was still, they began again. At one point, I thought I saw a shape, tall, broad, moving between the trees, but it was too dark to tell. I lay there, eyes wide open, heart pounding so hard I thought it would shake the tent. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When the first gray light crept over the ridges, I packed up and pushed on. I was supposed to hike another 2 days before heading back, but I decided right then I was done. I was going to retrace my steps, make it back to the truck, and leave. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. All day, as I hiked back, I kept glancing over my shoulder. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of movement, a dark shape slipping between the trees, but every time I stopped and looked, it was gone. By late afternoon, I reached the point where I had first found the huge tracks. I bent down to look again, feeling a mix of dread and fascination. Then I heard it, a low, heavy breath, not close, maybe 30 or 40 yards away, but loud enough to freeze me in place. I slowly stood up, heart hammering in my chest, and then I saw it. It stepped out from behind a stand of trees. At first, I thought it was a massive elk, but no, it was something else. It stood taller than any elk or moose I'd ever seen, its shoulders broad and heavy, its body thick with muscle, its head massive with wide, sweeping antlers. Its coat was dark, shaggy, almost black. It stood there, watching me, nostrils flaring, breath steaming in the cold air. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, it turned and walked away, vanishing into the trees. I didn't waste time. I turned and hiked as fast as I could, barely stopping to drink water, barely noticing the growing ache in my legs and back. I pushed hard, harder than I ever had before, until the sun set and the woods turned dark. I kept going by headlamp, determined to make it back to the truck. By midnight, I stumbled onto the old road and saw the glint of metal through the trees. My truck. I nearly ran the last 100 yards. When I climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and sat there shaking, I realized just how close I had been to something I couldn't explain. I don't know what I saw out there. Some relic of the past, maybe some enormous wild creature that shouldn't exist anymore, but does, hidden deep in the wild places where no one looks. I only know this. I won't be going back. Not to that part of the forest. Not ever. Sometimes, when people ask me about my hiking trips, they say things like, "In the wild, that's awesome." And I smile, nod, and keep my mouth shut, because out there, in the true wild, there are things you don't want to meet. And if you do meet them, you walk away quietly, and you don't go back. You leave the wild to the wild, because some things out there are older, bigger, and far less forgiving than we imagine. Back in 2015, I was hiking in Arizona, alone. I had done a lot of hikes before, especially in Europe, through some pretty rough and steep trails, so I wasn't too worried. Arizona's desert landscape was new for me, but I was confident. I had checked the weather, packed enough water, wore good boots, and even carried a light jacket for when the sun dipped down. I started early in the day, making sure to have enough daylight to cover the trail I picked. The trail itself was dry and rocky, with sharp desert plants on both sides. The sun was still hot when I started, but as the afternoon stretched on, it began to cool. I had a good pace, stopping sometimes to take pictures of the huge rock formations or the strange, twisted trees. The trail wasn't very popular that time of year, and I liked the quiet. It was just me, the crunch of my boots, and the occasional rustle of wind through the bushes. As the sun dipped lower, the shadows got longer. The colors of the desert started to shift, golden light hitting the red rocks, the sky turning softer and deeper blue. I wasn't worried. I had checked the distance on the map, and even if I reached the end after sundown, I had a headlamp. But then I reached a part of the trail that felt empty. Not just empty of people, but empty of sound. I hadn't seen another hiker for maybe an hour or two by then, but now even the birds were gone. No rustling in the bushes, no insects buzzing. Just the faint sound of my own breathing and boots on the ground. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like a weight pressing down on you. I kept walking. I told myself that I was fine, that I had hiked worse terrains, lonelier places, that the desert was just a little eerie at dusk. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept looking behind me, even though I knew no one was there. I adjusted my pack, shifted my shoulders, cleared my throat, little movements to fill the silence. That's when I heard it, music. At first, it was faint, almost like the wind carrying a tune. I stopped walking, trying to focus. It wasn't music exactly. It was whistling. Someone was whistling a tune ahead of me on the trail. My heart jumped. For a moment, I was relieved. Company. Another hiker. Someone else out here heading the same way. But the relief quickly mixed with a strange unease. There was something about that whistling, slow, steady, without any breaks, that felt off. I kept walking, and the sound grew louder. Eventually, I saw him. He was maybe 50 feet ahead, walking in the same direction as me. A man, wearing just a t-shirt and light pants. No jacket, no backpack. Nothing you'd expect someone to wear when hiking through a desert trail at dusk, especially when the night chill was already creeping in. He kept walking slowly, his back slightly hunched, head tilted down. The whistling came from him, no doubt. It floated softly in the air, cutting through the silence. I picked up my pace a little, enough to catch up to him. When I got closer, I turned slightly, ready to offer a polite nod or smile, the usual friendly hiker gesture. But as I passed, he didn't look at me. His face was deadpan, eyes downcast. The whistling didn't pause, not even for a second. His feet moved slowly, almost dragging, like he was in some kind of trance. I felt a strange chill run down my back. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to. I just kept my eyes forward and sped up, eager to put some distance between us. I kept walking, listening as the whistling faded behind me. Then suddenly the whistling stopped. I didn't want to look back. Every part of me told me not to just keep moving, but I couldn't help it. I stopped, turned around, and the trail behind me was empty. There was no one there, no sound, no trace that anyone had been there at all. The trail stretched back, winding through the rocks and bushes, but there was no man, no faint silhouette, no figure in the distance. It was like he had never been there. My heart was pounding. I stood there for a minute, scanning the trail, trying to convince myself that maybe he had stepped off, maybe into the brush, maybe taking a shortcut or something. But it made no sense. The brush was dense and full of sharp plants. You couldn't just slip off unnoticed. And I hadn't heard anything. No footsteps, no rustling, no sound of someone hurrying away. I told myself to calm down. I forced myself to breathe slowly. My skin felt cold, despite the heat that still lingered in the air. I turned back and kept walking. For the next hour, I didn't see or hear anything. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to hear that soft whistle again, but there was nothing. Just the sound of my own footsteps, the faint sigh of the wind. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, and I switched on my headlamp, the beam cutting a narrow path through the growing dark. I followed the trail carefully, watching every step. The desert at night is different. The shapes change, shadows shift, and familiar landmarks become strange and unfamiliar. But I stayed on the path. My feet knew the rhythm, my body kept moving forward. Finally, after what felt like forever, I reached the trailhead. My car was there, sitting quietly under the dim moonlight. There were no other cars in the lot. No sign that anyone else had been out there that evening. I climbed in, locked the doors, and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. My hands were shaking slightly. I kept thinking about the man on the trail, the slow steps, the deadpan face, the unbroken whistling, and the way he had just vanished. I drove back to where I was staying, checking the rearview mirror more often than usual. I made it back without any issues, locked the door behind me, and sat down on the edge of the bed. That night, I kept playing it over and over in my head. Was it possible I had imagined it? That maybe the light was playing tricks on me? But no, I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. For days afterward, I kept searching online. I looked up stories of that trail, searched forums, tried to find any reports of someone acting strangely out there. Nothing. No missing persons, no local legends, no news reports. It's been years since then, but I still think about that night. I don't believe in ghosts, and I'm not saying that's what it was. But sometimes, when you're alone in the desert, strange things can happen. You can meet people who don't quite fit, who slip through the cracks of your memory, leaving you wondering if they were ever really there. I've hiked alone many times since then, in other places, other trails. But I never went back to that Arizona trail. I never wanted to test my luck again. Some things, some moments stay with you, even when there's no clear explanation. And sometimes the scariest part isn't what you see or hear. It's what you can't explain, no matter how many times you go over it in your mind. That night, I made it out safely. Nothing happened. Nothing followed me. But even now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear that slow, steady whistling fading away into the desert night.